Kirk session records show a deliberate pattern. Punishment rates for women increased dramatically during winter months, particularly December through February. Some historians argue this was coincidental, that more disputes happened during winter when people were confined indoors together, but others, including Dr. Elizabeth Young at the University of Guelph, argue the timing was strategic. Winter jug sentences carried higher mortality risk, and authorities knew it. That meant winter punishments served as more effective deterrents. A woman collared for 6 hours in July might emerge exhausted and humiliated, but physically intact. A woman collared for the same duration in January might emerge with permanent tissue damage or might not emerge alive at all. The enhanced suffering, the visible physical consequences that lasted for life, these made winter the preferred season for making examples of women who forgot their place. Let me tell you about Helen Guthrie, because her story perfectly illustrates how the system punished women even when they were provably right. Forfar 1661. Helen's neighbor stole her hen. In a time when one chicken could mean the difference between eating and starving, this mattered enormously. So Helen did what any reasonable person would do. She accused her neighbor publicly in the village square. The neighbor denied it. Helen insisted. The argument grew heated. The Kirk session collared Helen for 12 hours on market day for disturbing the peace with accusations. 12 hours standing in November cold, the iron collar cutting into her neck, her neighbors walking past with their market purchases, everyone seeing her humiliation. 3 weeks later, the neighbor confessed. She had stolen the hen. She'd felt guilty and finally admitted it to the minister. The Kirk session's response to Helen? Nothing. No apology. No compensation for the 12 hours of torture. No acknowledgement that they'd punished an innocent woman for telling the truth. Instead, they added a note to their records that should make you furious. Better 10 honest women shamed than 1 guilty go free. Read that again? They explicitly stated that torturing 10 innocent women was acceptable collateral damage to ensure no guilty person escaped punishment. And by guilty, they meant any woman who spoke loudly enough to disturb male comfort. Part 9, 1,287 characters. But Helen's ordeal pales compared to Isabelle Young's 24-hour winter sentence. Let me walk you through what those 24 hours actually meant. January 14th, 1678. Isabelle was collared at noon after Sunday service. The Kirk session positioned her at the church entrance, so every parishioner leaving the service walked directly past her. Dozens of people she knew, people she'd worshipped alongside for years, filing past her locked neck, most avoiding eye contact, a few whispering prayers, none intervening. By 3 p.m., 3 hours in, Isabelle's legs were shaking uncontrollably. The iron collar had already abraded her neck badly enough that blood was seeping into her collar. By 6 p.m., darkness had fallen, and temperature dropped further. Scottish January darkness lasts 16 hours. Isabelle faced 16 hours of standing in the dark, in the cold, in that collar. By 9 p.m., 9 hours in, her bladder finally failed. She'd been holding it for as long as humanly possible, knowing the humiliation of public urination, but eventually biology won. The urine froze almost immediately to her skirts. By midnight, 12 hours, Isabelle was experiencing moderate hypothermia, confusion, slurred speech, extreme fatigue. But she couldn't sleep, couldn't sit, couldn't lie down. Could only stand there, swaying, the collar jerking her alert every time she started to collapse. By 3 a.m., 15 hours, her feet had gone completely numb. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. The tissue was dying. Dawn brought no relief, just visibility for her suffering. By 6 a.m., 18 hours in, Isabelle was barely conscious. By 9 a.m., 21 hours, she was experiencing severe hypothermia. Core temperature around 30 degrees Celsius, rigid muscles, barely detectable breathing. When they finally removed the collar at noon, exactly 24 hours after they'd locked it on, Isabelle couldn't walk. They had to carry her home. Within 3 days, her 3 smallest toes on her right foot had turned completely black. By day 7, those toes simply fell off, the necrotic tissue separating from living flesh. Dunfermline Abbey records include a medical notation about Isabelle's case. Lost 3 toes to frost sickness following Kirk penance. That dry, clinical language doesn't capture the reality. Isabelle Young was 26 years old when they collared her. She lived to age 68. That means she spent 42 years, 15,000 days, taking every step with the constant reminder of what happened when she suggested that feeding starving children mattered more than rigid Sabbath rules. But Isabelle survived. Not everyone did. Kirk session records are frustratingly incomplete about deaths, but scholars have identified at least 37 documented cases where women died within 2 weeks of jug punishment during winter months. 37 names, we know. The real number is almost certainly higher because rural parishes kept poor records, and women's deaths were often attributed to natural causes or the cold sickness, without mentioning the recent torture that precipitated it. Now let me tell you about the woman who fought back. Margaret Hutcherson, Edinburgh, 1692. Margaret was a widow running a small bakery, her only source of income. The local bailiff came to collect taxes she genuinely couldn't afford. She was already living on the edge of starvation herself. When she couldn't pay, he seized her bread oven. Without that oven, she had no business. Without business, she would literally starve to death. So Margaret did what any of us would do in that situation. She protested, loudly, publicly. She called the bailiff unfair. She called the tax collection corrupt. She called the whole system rigged against poor widows. 3 days in the jokes. But here's where Margaret's story diverges from the typical pattern. She refused to apologize. Day 1. Apologize and we'll release you early. Margaret refused. Day 2. Just apologize. Still refused. Day 3. Something extraordinary happened. The community started bringing her food, covering her with blankets at night, standing vigil with her. This had never happened before in documented Kirk session records. The bailiff, facing public pressure for the first time, backed down. He reduced her tax debt. She got her oven back. Margaret Hutcherson's resistance became the first documented case of community solidarity actually working against Kirk session authority, but the cost was enormous. Margaret suffered permanent nerve damage in her neck from 3 days in the collar. She had chronic pain for the rest of her life. The jugs didn't just damage bodies, it destroyed social fabric and created generational trauma. Think about what it meant for daughters to watch mothers collared. Imagine being a 10-year-old girl standing in the village square watching your mother locked in iron, watching her bleed, watching her lose control of her bladder, watching adults you've been taught to respect walk past and do nothing. What does that teach you about your voice, your worth, your right to speak? It teaches you that silence is survival, that your words are dangerous. That disagreeing with authority, even when you're right, even when children are starving, even when you're defending your own survival, is a crime worthy of torture. Generational trauma passed down through fear, mothers teaching daughters to keep quiet, to never argue publicly, to always defer to male authority, because the alternative was iron and cold and permanent physical damage. And the Kirk sessions knew this. They counted on it. The jugs wasn't just about punishing individual women, it was about maintaining a culture of silence across entire generations. One woman collared taught 100 women to be quiet. The efficiency was remarkable from a control perspective and absolutely horrifying from a human rights perspective. Women also started policing each other, because if you reported your neighbor first, maybe you'd avoid suspicion. Maybe you'd prove your own loyalty to the system. The Kirk sessions turned women against each other, making them complicit in their own oppression. This is how authoritarian control always works. Make the oppressed responsible for oppressing each other. There's another dimension to Jug's torture that original Kirk session records mention only briefly, always vaguely, because the details were considered too disturbing for official documentation. The sexual vulnerability. Women locked in the jugs couldn't maintain modesty. They couldn't protect themselves. They urinated publicly. They menstruated publicly. The heavy iron collar frequently tore necklines, causing exposure, and the records mention, always euphemistically, men tormenting collared women. What did that mean? The records don't specify, deliberately don't specify, but women were locked in place, unable to defend themselves, while crowds gathered. Physical assault. Sexual harassment. The records use phrases like indignities suffered and improper liberties taken without providing details. The degradation was intentional. The vulnerability was designed into the punishment. This wasn't just about silencing voices. This was about stripping women of dignity, agency, and bodily autonomy simultaneously. The National Museum of Scotland preserves 23 surviving jugs. Each one has provenance. Each one has history. At Duddingston Kirk in Edinburgh, there's a collar with scratches inside. Deep scratches. Forensic analysis suggests they're fingernail marks. A woman, we don't know her name, we have no record of her crime or fate, tried to pry that collar off her own neck with her bare hands, clawing at solid iron. The desperation preserved in those scratch marks is haunting. She left pieces of herself in that metal, fingernails torn away trying to escape, and we don't even know who she was.